Man, it is good to be heading back into game week after a weekend off for the Tar Heels, and that means it's a perfect time to take stock of where things have been for the first 3 weeks of games for the Tar Heels. So we're going to look back, and then we're going to take some time to look ahead at what's coming for North Carolina.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, it's Monday, September 19th, 2022. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast. I'm your host, Isaac Schade, and joining me is the man, Anthony Pagnotta. We get a double dose of our guy this week. So excited for that. We want to thank you for making Locked On Tar Heels your first listen or your first watch every single day. Please don't forget the show is free and available anywhere you get podcasts, so you can subscribe right now to make sure you don't miss a second of your team every day. So here's what Anthony and I are doing today. We're going to take a little bit of a look back at what's happened through the first 3 games, take stock of some things, and then in our last segment of the day, we are going to look ahead, just projecting a little bit over the final several months of the season. And so, Anthony, what I want to start with is just looking at, I love this feature that you do of some stock up and some stock down. So through these first 3 games, I want to hear from you 3 players or 3 position groups or whatever it may be that for you are stock up.
Well, stock up, I think, first of all, it's a very easy one, but I'm going to take it because it's there. Drake Maye is definitely stock up. Coming in, to about a week and a half out of the start of the season, we didn't even know who the quarterback was going to be. I think a lot of people probably thought it was going to end up being Drake Maye, and that's who they end up going with. And now we can see why. And now, there are actually some of us that are kind of sitting there saying to ourselves, man, how good is Jacolby Criswell if it took him that long to have the separation from Drake Maye? So I think you just look at the numbers that he's put up, and I think now we'll have to reset. We'll see this week, here early on, probably Monday or Tuesday. They'll start to sort of put out where he is in the Heisman ranks. But I saw a lot of people heading into this past weekend, just based off those first 3 games. A lot of people had this dude, second, third in the country in terms of what he was doing. And I think at the least, he has put himself on a lot of national radars. There are a lot of different guys that I've seen talking about him, a lot of people that are looking at him as somebody that is going to be a big-time prospect towards the NFL draft over the next few years. A lot of comparisons of him to guys like Trevor Lawrence, all the way to Justin Herbert, who I watched a little bit of his game the other night on Thursday night, and I thought there were some really good comparisons to it. So I think the thing is, people were wondering about this quarterback position after a legend like Sam Howell left campus. But man, Drake Maye really has us feeling confident. I think the fact that they just started the NIL sales of jerseys for the current Tar Heel players just a few weeks ago. I would imagine that Drake Maye, you're going to see a lot of Drake Maye jerseys in that stadium on Saturday night, or Saturday afternoon, rather, when they play Notre Dame, because this dude has really, really stolen Carolina fans' hearts. Another guy that I think you look at and his stocks up through the early portion of the season, I got to say Kobe Paysor. I think you can say a lot about the wide receiving core, but this was a guy that didn't even win the starting job at a camp. Now, part of that may be logistics of them wanting to have him in the slot as opposed to putting him on the outside. But look, going into that game against App State, most of us were thinking it. When we found out that Josh Downs wasn't going to play, there were a lot of us that were saying to ourselves, man, what kind of game are we in for today? And if you would have told me that the defense let up 61 without Josh Downs, I would have told you there's no way that this team won that game. But a guy like Kobe Paysor, back-to-back weeks for Carolina, he led the team in receiving. So he has been outstanding. And I think he's a guy that has sort of created a little bit of a conundrum for this coaching staff to try to get him on the field in some capacity. Because, as we heard when Mack Brown has talked about Josh Downs here over the last couple of years, he says, look, that freshman year, we should have been more creative to try to get him on the field, even though we had Daz Newsome. Well, Kobe Paysor is putting you in a very similar situation. How are you going to get him on the field? And the last, this one will be a group that I think overall their stock is up. I think you got to have the offensive line overall as stock up. And part of that is because, well, if you were buying stock for stockbrokers, you probably could have gotten that for about a penny for the share. That was very, very low coming into the year. But look, man, they've had their stretches. There's been a couple of moments. I mean, it happened in the App State game and the Georgia State game where they had stretches where they let up a decent amount of pressure. But they sort of regained themselves and restabilized and made plays when they had to. I think their run blocking throughout the year has been pretty solid. I think their pass protection is probably still the one thing that you're questioning a little bit with this unit. But I think for the most part, you have to commend the job that Jack Bicknell Jr. has done coming in here and getting these guys to adjust their mindset. They have made some strides out of the gate. And I think, the other day against Georgia State, I think the biggest thing that you saw was Spencer Rolland is an important piece for this team on the offensive line. I don't think Jonathan Adorno played bad, but to have a veteran guy like that out there that creates that flexibility, that gives you the opportunity to where, hey, if somebody is struggling on that right side, we can take them out of the game and let things slow down for them for a second and put somebody else in for a drive. I think that's huge for Carolina. So I think those are the three that I think right now, overall, through the first 3 games of the season, you got to have your stock up on. And as you can see, they are all on the offensive side of the ball.
I was picking up on that, and in fact was about to say it. I was like, that's very interesting, but obviously makes a ton of sense that everyone in your stock up category is all the guys putting up these monster numbers on offense right now. And by the way, you talked about App State. What a crazy beginning to the season they've had. The game against North Carolina, the 63-61, then the upset in College Station, and then that crazy Hail Mary walk-off this past weekend. The Mountaineers are just riding the crazy train, make sure everyone, not to mention hosting game day, by the way. Wow, wow, wow. Now, Anthony, let's look on the other side of the ledger. We've had our stock up. What are we trying to sell off? Whose stock is down?
Well, I mean, first, I think the guy whose stock down and whose stock is down the most from the start of the season is Storm Duck, and it's a guy that I think a lot of people, honestly, it's kind of painful because we watched him as a freshman and we thought, man, this guy had something special. And I wonder, how much of the injury slowed him down? Is he at this point? You almost wonder, is he still dealing with something that we really don't know, and he's just trying to fight through it because he wants to be able to be out on the field. Because he has gotten toasted in each of the first 3 games. He's allowed 70 or more yards in coverage. He's allowed 5 touchdowns. This is a guy that just right now can't seem to get his footing. And I hate to say it, but he's, I wrote an article that I put up the other day, and I said that there are, some guys that probably need to have some competition at their position. And I think that he is one of those guys. You got to start looking at other guys at that spot and seeing if they're just a better long-term fit for you right now, because he is really, really struggling. And I don't really know how to get him back on track. I know they were wanting to try to use him a little bit at nickel. Yeah, maybe that's an option, although I don't know if you want to take DeAndre Boykins off the field with how he's been playing. So it's such a challenge right now with him. But he's a guy that I think a lot of people were wanting to see him sort of get back to that freshman form at the least, if not take that step forward that we thought he was going to be able to take after his freshman year. And it's just not happening for him right now. The other group that just a group in general that I think the stock is down on is the defensive line. There's no doubt that was probably the unit that I think most of us were most excited about, not just on the defensive side of the ball, but really on the entire team. Because if you looked at the overall talent of this group, I mean, you're talking about 4 and 5 stars across the board. Pretty much Carolina had a 3 deep of 5 stars ready to go. And so far, these dudes have struggled as much as any defensive front group that I've seen Carolina have over these last few years. I mean, you talk about just where the talent level was at with Gene Chizik when he first came in 2015 on that defensive line. Your best pass rusher was Mikey Bart, and that was a unit that got home more often than this unit did. I mean, look, the first week, Carolina 23 total pressures in the game. So that's sacks, hurries, and quarterback hits. The last 2 weeks combined 23. So, and look, you're getting ready to go up against Notre Dame. You're going up against the Virginia Tech team that, look, they're not great offensively, but their offensive line is one of their strengths. You're going to face really good offensive lines the rest of the way out. So you couldn't beat up on the guys that you were supposed to beat up on. How much confidence do you have in this group moving forward? And I think that's part of the reason why you got to start seeing rotation up there. I think we've all seen it. Travis Shaw, it looks the part. I know he may not be in the greatest shape, but it's time to start rotating some of these other dudes in, and let's see if they can generate anything up front, because without pressure, it's not going to be able to help the rest of this group. And then I think the other thing, that I would probably put stock down on sort of combines with that defensive line. I think it's Tim Cross, the defensive line coach for the Tar Heels right now. Look, again, he's done a tremendous job recruiting-wise. I just talked about how this room is loaded with 4- and 5-star guys, but it just doesn't seem like they are being developed. It's the same issues that were plaguing this group a year ago. It's guys that cannot get off of blocks. It doesn't seem like there's a ton of rotation down there either. And it seems like right now the group is just lacking the physicality that they need to have down there. And I thought Tim Cross was one of those guys coming into the year. It was a big year for him. He had to see this group step up and perform the way that we know they are capable of. It hasn't happened so far. And look, I know it's only 3 games into the season, and I'm not saying it's time for him to go just yet. But what I am saying is you've got to see some market improvement moving forward, because if you don't, in order for things to work with Gene Chizik and Mack Brown, guys that don't seem to have the longest timelines in college football, you need some immediate results here, and they may have to look at a new defensive line coach.
Ooh, boy, you're not wrong on any of that, but it is tough to take that in and hear. But listen, you're giving up 61 points. You gotta figure some stuff out. And man, good stuff. Thank you for your honesty. Thanks for bringing all that in, Anthony. I think you're spot on with all of that. Now, some of these are expected, some unexpected, and that's the truth for any season. I want to find out from Anthony what is his biggest surprise and his most frustrating letdown, if there's any outside of that. And so far, who is his non-Drake Maye MVP for this team? We'll talk about that right after I tell you about Bet Online. Bet Online is your #1 source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. Find the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this upcoming week's games. BetOnline is also your continued source for your sports wagering info, including live betting, esports, and scores. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about all the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Mr. Anthony. So some of this might truthfully be similar answers to stock up, stock down, but if there are other answers outside of that, would love to know it. So first, I want to start with who has been the biggest surprise to you? Who, or perhaps what, has been the biggest surprise to you so far this season for North Carolina?
I mean, there's definitely a couple of things, but I would say, if you're going in the positive direction, I would say it's probably been the true freshman running backs, primarily Kamari and Hampton. I think that we thought George Pettaway would be a guy that could contribute to this team. And I think, maybe his contributions have been about what we expected with this group. But Kamari and Hampton being a summer enrollee, coming in and basically being the top running back on this team, is pretty amazing to me, because, look, I know that there was talent galore with him, and we knew he was going to be a good player. But it's a steep learning curve going from the high school game, especially when you're as dominant as he is. Usually those guys that are as dominant as he is, we saw it the year before with a guy that Carolina brought in their recruiting class, and Kamaro Edmonds, it didn't translate. Where with Kamari and Hampton, it's just completely different. This guy is living up to all the comparisons. I know first game of the year, there were some comparisons to Natrone Means. There's been endless comparisons of him to a freshman Javonte Williams. Yeah. But I thought what you saw in that Georgia State game was special. That was a guy that can run with power, but when he needed to hit that hole and needed to make a play for Carolina to turn the events of a game that was not going Carolina's way at that point, he did. And for a true 100%. Freshman to be able to do that out of the backfield is great. And that's what you want to see from Carolina. I think that so many people focus on what Carolina has at quarterback or wide receiver in this Phil Longo offense. But ultimately, the key to this Phil Longo offense, and I'll give credit to my co-host Josh Marlowe, who has been saying this since we first started talking about Phil Longo's offense when he first arrived in Chapel Hill. The key to this offense is the run game. And it has been shown once again this year that when this team runs the ball well, they are going to win a lot of games. And Amari and Hampton has been outstanding so far this year. I would say the biggest shock in the other direction and the most disappointing direction, it's kind of a balance between that defensive line and that secondary. But I would probably still lean with that defensive line. Again, like I said, there were just so many expectations, and it's so many of the guys that are there too. I hate calling out names of guys, but, we expected a lot from Miles Murphy. We thought that he was going to be a guy that took the next step. And I know he got banged up in the game against Georgia State, but before then, he's a guy that's kind of been getting taken out of games, and you need him to be that guy that can take on two offensive linemen and still be able to cause havoc in there. I think the one that's probably the most frustrating once again is we haven't seen what we heard in fall camp, even in the spring, carry over for Des Evans. He's a guy that's been non-existent really these first few games of the year. I know Carolina gave him the defensive player of the game against App State. To be fair, I think you only had to make about one or two plays in that game and you had a shot. And he did make a couple of nice plays early, but he's kind of disappeared outside of that. Yeah. You need more consistency. And I got to tell you, I think once again, Kamen Rucker is looking more consistent than him, and he's a guy that's working harder.
And he started against Georgia State, right? Rucker
I believe so, and I think he deserves it. I think Kamen Rucker is one of those guys that he's undersized. He's probably a guy that doesn't fit the position that he's playing at perfectly, but he's a dude that just balls. He plays hard, man. He's going to give you 110% every play. And that's the reason why he's out there. And I'm not saying that Des Evans isn't giving you that, but this is a guy that is not living up to his high 4-star, and for the longest time, a 5-star billing. And it's just you're seeing this across the unit of guys that are 4 and 5 stars that just are not playing at the level that they need to right now. So it's hard not to be disappointed in that unit. And believe me, I want them to be able to turn around, and they've got the guys to do it. Yeah. But it's, as a Tar Heel fan, you're honestly probably sitting there saying to yourself, when is it going to happen? We've been begging for it to happen since some of these guys started rolling in back in 2020, and it just hasn't. So it's time to stop having all this hype in the preseason and for this unit to step up. And I think they may have to do it, as I mentioned just a little bit ago, for a defensive line coach that could be on the hot seat.
Yeah, boy. And like you said, I think it does come down to either the line or the secondary, but my goodness, the secondary could be helped out a lot by the line, making things a little bit more uncomfortable for the quarterback, and then everything would look better all around. So it's got to start up front. I'm with you, Anthony. Great call there. Now, I think if I ask you who's the MVP of this team through the first 3 weeks, it's no-brainer Drake Maye, just like you started off with your first stock up. So I'm going to take him off the table and make you give me somebody else outside of Drake Maye who so far has been the MVP of this team.
Man, that's a tough one, man. There's so many guys here, but I gotta go with Amari and Hampton. I mean, still one of the nation's leading rushers in terms of touchdowns. And he's gotten off to a really solid start. I mean, look, pretty slow game against App State in terms of yards, but did find the end zone. So he's found the end zone in each of his first 3 games. Right. And so far, 2 of the first 3, Florida A&M and Georgia State, he's ran for over 100 yards and ran for 2 touchdowns. And I think you can't put enough stock into that play that he made on a long touchdown run against Georgia State, because that completely changed that game. If he does not make that long run, Carolina's probably 2-1, because at that point, Georgia State had all the momentum going their way, and he rips one off. And look, it's back-to-back weeks that Carolina's run game made a huge play for them. Caleb Hood the week before made that huge play for App State. But Amari and Hampton really stepping up early on. I think it's close, though. I think Kobe Paysor deserves a lot of credit for how well he's played in the first 2 games of the season. I think it's just really tough because, I think if he had stayed healthy, I feel like this answer, no doubt, would be Josh Downs. But at the same time, you kind of have to ask yourself, was the Josh Downs injury maybe one of the better things that happened to this offense that forced them to find out what they had in some of these other guys? And these younger guys are stepping up and making plays so far for Carolina.
Yeah, it just only can bring you excitement and expectation for what happens when he does return. And obviously, if I gave you Drake Maye back on the table, he's your choice here. But man, how cool that a true freshman summer enrollee is your answer to this question. Really neat stuff. Folks, make sure you're not missing out. And also another shout out to the offensive line for creating that hole through which Hampton had that impressive run to turn the momentum back in Carolina's favor in that game. Well, so far we have been looking backwards and we want to flip our attention now forwards. Let's look at what's happened in these first 3 weeks and then give some projections about where we think the rest of the season is heading with where we're at. We've seen the product on the field. What does it mean? So, Anthony, what I want to ask you, actually, first, before we get there, let's mention this. We are about 2 months away, just under 2 months away from basketball season. And so far, apparently some schools have thought that it was already basketball season because we have 7 of the 10 winningest basketball programs of all time that are currently 3-0. Hear me again, folks. 7 of the top 10 winningest basketball programs of all time are 10-0 or 3-0, excuse me. Kansas, number 1 all time, Kentucky, number 2, Carolina 3, Duke 4, Syracuse 6, UCLA 7, and Indiana 10. Those are 7 of the top 10. All 7 of those schools are apparently now football programs, all sitting at 3-0. How fun is this to watch, Mr. Pagnotta?
I mean, it's insane, man. There was a push. A lot of people were very disappointed by the fact that they were not going to Lawrence to cover the game on game day between Duke and Kansas, which is the craziest thing that we've ever heard. I'm pretty sure that most people would have been heading to Allen Fieldhouse, and then they would have realized, no, this is for a football game, people. But it's tremendous.
Wrong game day, yeah.
I think, you look at some of the teams, a lot of them have coaches that are relatively new. Lance Leopold at Kansas, who's done a tremendous job. Mike Elko, I mean, look, I know a lot of Tar Heel fans don't want to do it, but you got to give him credit at Duke. He's off to a great start there. It looks like he could have something going with that program. And then Indiana, they've had Tom Allen for a few years now. They were good a couple of years ago, but a lot of people thought that they were a team that was just going to kind of rescind, especially after they lost their starting quarterback to the transfer portal this past offseason. So it's been tremendous. And I mean, look, you've seen some really good environments at some of these schools as well. I would imagine that Kansas is going to have a pretty solid environment for their game. I thought the environment the other day for Syracuse's game against Purdue was outstanding. It's just, I mean, it's really cool to see that there are some schools that are, looked at as basketball schools, looked at as schools that just do not care about football. That's been the moniker, I think, really, especially for Tar Heel fans, that's been the moniker for a long time. Well, they'll be in basketball mode by October. And I know Carolina fans are probably a little conflicted about how to feel at this point, but hey, you're undefeated. And the other cool thing, I mentioned it to you right before we got on here, everybody from the Triad is undefeated as well. Wake Forest got a heck of a scare from Liberty. That was very, very close. But everybody else, they are still undefeated at this point. So the state of North Carolina and the basketball schools throughout the country are off to a tremendous start to this season.
Man, pretty cool stuff. Love to see it. I'm sure it's obviously not going to carry on too long, but we got to recognize it while it's happening. So now let's look ahead. Anthony, first, what I want to get from you is based on what we've already seen. I know we've got technically Notre Dame is a non-conference game, but they play basically, a big ACC schedule, and they're ACC and all these other sports. So basically now we're into conference play. So give me just a couple storylines that you're really going to be watching closely as we now get into conference play.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's kind of how open is the Coastal, because I'm starting to think it is a lot more open than we originally thought. My preseason pick currently has an issue at quarterback. Pitt doesn't know. We have no idea what the status of Keaton Slovis is going forward, or even Nick Patty. They had to start their third-string quarterback the other night against Western Michigan. Yeah. That's not really going to work great when you get into conference play. So we're going to have to see where exactly they're at. There's a team that is also maybe a little bit vulnerable defensively, a little more than a year ago. And remember, Carolina has gone to overtime against them back-to-back games that they've played them. So they've been really close. Can they find a way to win that one in this year's matchup in Kenan Stadium? That would be huge. But I think outside of them, look, I think some people, definitely had high expectations for Miami. I'm not saying that they are a team that is going to have a terrible year by any stretch of the imagination, or that there is no chance that they could win the ACC Coastal. But I don't think they're as dominant as we thought they could possibly be. I still think it's going to take Mario Cristobal time to sort of build what he's trying to build there. Virginia, man, they have some pieces offensively, but their offensive line really, really struggles, and their defense is still not good. So they're a team that Carolina should have a chance against. And, Virginia Tech, another team that I think some people were wondering what exactly would they be in their first year under their head coach, Brent Pry. Well, the good news is for Virginia Tech fans, they're a pretty good defensive team. The bad news is they are not a good offensive team by any stretch. So I think if you look at this, and I mean, I don't know where Duke is at this point. I think that you've got to start considering them as a team that could maybe not win the ACC Coastal, but could be a factor if you are sleeping on them coming into the game that you play against them. And then Georgia Tech is just they're looking bad. But I think what you're seeing, with all that I described, is this Coastal's open, and this is it's the last year of the ACC Coastal. It only makes sense that there would be more Coastal chaos. So I think Carolina, they've got to think that they've got an opportunity here. And the other thing that I'm really looking for is, what can this defense gain some confidence in itself moving forward? Can they get that one game that sort of starts to get them rolling? Because we all think that at some point it is going to happen because of who the defensive coordinator is. If they can, it ties in with that first storyline that I just brought up, this team could win the ACC Coastal. But it's on this defense to step up. This offense is more than capable of scoring 38, 40 points a game this season. The problem is if you don't stop some of these offenses that you're going to play, pretty much some of those offenses, especially at the end of the schedule, Wake Forest, that's one that'll be tough, Pittsburgh. And I don't really know what to make of NC State's offense at this point, which does not look good at all. Yeah. But you never really know by that point in the season. Carolina could be in some trouble. So they've got to be able to gain some confidence defensively, because if they can, there's a chance that they could be in a really good spot to win this ACC Coastal this year.
Man, that's some great acknowledgments there, Anthony. Like, it's so true. Like, it's very wide open. A lot of teams were not really sure what to make of them yet. And obviously that same with the Tar Heels, right? And that's going to unfold as things continue on. Now, you talked about some of these tough tests later in the schedule. I want to hear from you as you look ahead to the final 9 games of the regular season. What would you say is the toughest test on the schedule?
Ooh, man, it's tough because there's a lot of matchups that are kind of different than I think we originally thought. I think Miami is one that most of us had kind of written down as a loss. But if you look at it now and you combine, Carolina's success against Miami, I think they've got a shot there. Now, the thing I will say is that we cannot just classify Miami off of what we saw the other night against Texas A&M. I know that wasn't a great performance, especially offensively, but it was on the road. The game for Carolina against the Hurricanes will be in Coral Gables, but I do think that is a team that looks a little bit more gettable than it did at the start of the season. Wake Forest looks really good, but I think they got very similar problems that they did a year ago. They really can't stop anybody. So that could be yet another matchup between the Tar Heels and Demon Deacons. The first one to 55 ends up winning that game.
Take the over, folks.
NC State is just – I don't really know where they're at. I think that they have avoided 2 possible upsets. Now, I mean, the one last night again, or the other night, I should say, against Texas Tech, I mean, I don't know if you would say they avoided the upset. They were up 20-0, but they still didn't look great in that game. So if I had to say right now, I would still say it's probably that NC State game, just because that's a team that if they get by Clemson, it's hard to see them losing another game the rest of the way because they'll probably be favored in just about every other game. But I think that it is a really close contest between them and Wake Forest at this point, because I think that Wake Forest, we've seen what Carolina's defenses looked like against a guy that was a veteran quarterback in Chase Bryce, who coming into the season, a lot of people didn't trust. Well, Sam Hartman's a guy that's a veteran and is a guy that a lot of people in the country trust and is putting up really good numbers. Both of those games, I think, will be very, very tough for Carolina.
Oh, yes. Another Thanksgiving week interesting rivalry match with Wolfpack. Should be fun. Carolina looking for some big-time revenge after the letdown last year. So, Anthony, last piece, and then we'll get out of here. You've got 9 more regular season games, 8 conference games in Notre Dame. What is your projection? We don't have to go game by game, but just give me the number for those final 9 games in terms of wins and losses.
Well, coming into the season, I had the team at 9-3, but that was me picking them to lose the game against App State. So conventional wisdom would say, hey, stick with your prediction, and this team is going to be 10-2 at the end of the season. And I think it's more than possible. I think I'll go with that. I think 7-2 down the stretch of the season. I'm a guy that's going to lean more optimistic, no doubt about it. But I think also when you look at it, Notre Dame's a team that is definitely not the team that we thought they were going to be, especially now without Tyler Buchner. That's a game that is going to be it's a weird one, because coming into the year, we looked at that as an opportunity to get a really big win for Carolina. Now, I think there's going to be a lot of people that look at that as, hey, they have to win this game because that's not a good Notre Dame team. Which is wild to think that we're at that point with how quickly things have changed at Notre Dame. Virginia Tech, that's always a team that's given Carolina trouble. But again, their offense doesn't look great. Miami looks a little more gettable, although I will still say Carolina probably loses that game being on the road in Coral Gables. And that team, look, they're still going to be pretty hyped up down there, because this is still a team that has a shot to make it to the ACC championship game. And all they got to do, look, a win later on down the line. I know they've got Clemson. I know they have a couple of other matchups in the ACC that are big-time matchups. One win could really sort of re-energize those conversations about Miami nationally. Duke on the road, I think Carolina wins that game probably. Pittsburgh at home, I got confidence in this team to get that one done. They have come so close the last 2 years. I think this year they'll pull it out, especially with them being at home. Virginia, that was one that I thought might be a tougher game. And, hey, Brennan Armstrong may throw for 500 yards on this team. But Drake may throw for 700, because that Virginia defense is just as bad as it was a year ago. So I think Carolina will win that one. Wake Forest, if I had to say, that's probably a loss right now. I just think, sort of the same thing that I talked about with Carolina and Pittsburgh. Wake Forest has been extremely close to beating Carolina the last couple of matchups. Their offense has done the job. Their defense just hasn't been able to help them out. So I think having to go there, that might be the difference. Georgia Tech, man, I mean, there are so many things that play a factor into that, but Carolina has to win that game this year, right? You've got a team in Georgia Tech that just looks beat down even early in the season right now. I mean, they just got shut out by Ole Miss, did not show a shred of hope for their fan base. Most people want their head coach fired down there in Jeff Collins. And Carolina's got to have the revenge factor in their mind after what happened last year, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm the guy, look, I will never, ever pick Carolina to lose to NC State. It is never going to happen. And I got to tell you, I think that Carolina's defense against NC State's offense, probably a pretty favorable matchup for the defense, because right now both of them are looking like hot garbage. So I think Carolina might have the edge in that one, especially with what happened last year. There is going to be so much animosity coming into that game, a lot of revenge that a lot of those guys on the sidelines are going to want to enact. And not to mention, it is going to be in Kenan Stadium. It will be a raucous environment, you would imagine, especially if they come in where I have the team sitting at 9-2.
Boy. Some potential big things are ahead. A wide open Coastal. Carolina's got to take care of business, though. Got to figure out the defensive side of the ball, as Anthony talked about. The good news is, got this opportunity ahead to knock off Notre Dame. It's still Notre Dame, despite their rough start. Anthony and I will talk about that game on Friday's show. Make sure you tune in. But as for today, that is it. Thanks so much for making Locked On Tar Heels your first listen or first watch today. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Heels. You can follow Anthony at HTB Anthony. Make sure you check out the Heel Tough blog. And you can follow me on Twitter at Isaac Schade. Get more on the ACC by making Locked On ACC your second listen of the day. Host Candace Cooper and the local experts of Locked On take you around the conference in 30 minutes, 5 days a week. Anthony and I want to thank you so much for joining us on a Monday as we get back into game week. And we want to remind you that it is always a great day to be a Tar Heel. Until tomorrow, peace.